Hi there, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is you're watching this. Welcome to Left Side of the Aisle. My name is Larry Erickson, I'm your host. And for the next half hour, I'm going to be ranting away at you at something that I think is important, I think you should think about and hopefully do something about. If you have any reactions to the show, you can email them to me directly. My personal email is whoviating, WHOVIATING @AOL.com. If you didn't catch that, you can go to my website, which is called Lotus Surviving a Dark Time. The email address will be over here a couple of times during the show. You can get the email address from there, or you can leave a comment there if you'd rather. The one thing I request, actually two things I request if you do send me email. One is to include something in the subject line of a kind that makes it clear this is not spam. And two, be a little patient about getting an answer because I'm really, really bad about answering my email and people get annoyed with me. But you will get an answer, so. All right, we're gonna head on out right from there. I guess it was just last week. I'm not even sure. These weeks kind of blend into each other at times. Just last week, I think it was, I talked about what I called the two great unaddressed evils of our society, which I said were racism and sexism. And by unaddressed, I meant that we are aware of them as evils, but still don't seem to actually really act on them. I also said that I thought that racism was the worst of the two, not that racism was worse than sexism, but as an unaddressed evil, it's worse because I think it is much more obvious than sexism is. But those were, again, our great unaddressed evils. This week, I'm going to talk about what I think is our great unrecognized evil, because there is a sickness in our society. It is the sickness of being rich. The rich are sick. They are morally, ethically, emotionally sick. And it's not that being rich makes you sick. It's the fact that in our society, being rich, having wealth, brings power. And as the man said a long time ago and remains true, power corrupts. Now, yes, that is a very sweeping judgment, saying that all rich are sick. And I actually have to amend it, clarify it some. In fact, I want to make a comparison between this and obesity. You see, obesity itself is not a sickness, not itself. But what it is not a good condition to be in because it puts you at much greater risk of things that truly are damaging. I mean, you can be obese and be completely healthy, but it puts you at much greater risk of heart disease, of diabetes, of a lot of other things. So it could and properly is regarded as not a healthy condition. In the same way, being rich and the power that being rich itself is not a sickness, but the wealth that it involves and the power that that wealth brings puts you at much greater risk of moral and ethical corruption because power corrupts. And just like the greater the degree of obesity, the greater the risk of heart disease and so on, the greater the wealth means the greater the power, means the greater the risk of moral corruption. And the fact is, there is an enormous amount of psychological research showing exactly this, showing that just by making people feel more powerful, just feel more powerful in comparison to those around them, you can affect how they deal with those others and the kind of judgments they make in response to moral and ethical questions. Just by making people feel more powerful in relation to those around them, you can create in them a sense of entitlement. You can create a sense that what I want is simply more important than all other considerations, and I deserve to have what I want. Again, there is a boatload of psychological and sociological research that shows this. So if you can do that in a laboratory experiment, short-term, very quick, only a few hours, and still have that kind of impact on how people respond. Imagine the effect if you live that day to day, moment to moment. If you've been brought up that way, brought up to believe that you have that entitlement, brought up with that sense of power every day. Because again, in our system, wealth is power, and power corrupts. So just like being obese doesn't mean that you have heart disease or diabetes or whatever else. Being rich doesn't mean that you are a callous, immoral sociopath with an inflated sense of your own value and importance, who has contempt for those who are less rich, who have less power than you do. But it does mean you're at genuine risk of turning into such a person. Because wealth is power, and power corrupts. Now you want to see that sense of entitlement, that power, that wealth brings? I'll give you two recent examples, okay? You undoubtedly know that California has been experiencing a severe drought, one likely connected to global climate change. Last fall, California Governor Jerry Brown called for austerity measures, and in April he asked people to cut their water usage by 25%. Okay, there is this ultra-rich enclave in San Diego County in Southern California called Rancho Santa Fe. This landscape of ranches, gated communities, and golf courses and country clubs already uses 5 times more water per capita than the statewide average. After the call to conserve water, water usage there went up 9%. But the drought continued, the drought got worse, the drought got more damaging. So finally, in July, as of July 1st, Rancho Santa Fe, along with some other equally wasteful areas in the state, became subject to water rationing. According to Jessica Parks of the Santa Fe Irrigation District, which provides water to Rancho Santa Fe and other parts of San Diego County, she said it's no longer you can only water your lawn on these days. Now it's a matter of you get this much water for this billing period, and if you use more than that, you get fined. Those fines can be up to $1,000 a day, and if people do not cooperate and after being fined, officials can actually place flow restrictors on these people's water meters, which basically just slows the flow of water to them. And the residents of Rancho Santa Fe, whose response to calls for conservation was to waste more water, are whining and blubbering like the self-centered 2-year-old screaming, "Mine, mine," that their wealth has emotionally turned them into. The Washington Post quoted resident Steve Uhas, weeping that people like him, quoting, should not be forced to live on property with brown lawns or golf on brown courses. Because, he said, no, we're not all equal when it comes to water. In other words, what he's saying is, I get to have what I want. And if that means your lawn is brown or your golf course is brown, but wait a minute, forget that last part because you can't afford to golf all the time, which means why your point doesn't matter. Anyway, well, if your tap runs dry, who cares? Well, you probably do, but you're a nobody, so that doesn't count. Only what I want counts. Gay Butler, for her part, got all petulant. Quoting her, we're being overly penalized and overly scrutinized. People aren't looking at the overall picture. What are we supposed to do? Just have dirt around our house on 4 acres? No, what you're supposed to do is conserve water in the midst of what is, by a number of measures, the worst drought in California's history. That inability to see the actual overall picture, that defining of the overall picture in terms of her desires, her interests, her preferences, that is the sociopathic sense that of entitlement that wealth and the power that accompanies it bring. It is the sickness of wealth, the sickness of being rich. Now again, not everybody falls prey to this. The same Washington Post article talked about how some residents of that same area are adapting to the drought by means such as using what's called drought-resistant landscaping. Like some examples, an example would be like replacing a water-hungry lawn with crushed stone pathways winding among succulents, which are plants that don't need much water. But the fact that some escape that doesn't mean that wealth is not morally and ethically unhealthy, any more than the fact that not all obese people have heart disease proves that obesity is a sign of peak condition. And here's another example. Here's the other example. This was particularly pointed. Right now, in order to qualify for federal housing block grants, local and state authorities must have plans showing that they are, quote, affirmatively furthering fair housing, unquote. In other words, you have to make sure that their communities offer affordable housing in all neighborhoods, not just focus them in poor ones, and that they don't discriminate. Now, affordable housing, by the way, is generally defined as housing that requires no more than a third of a family's income. Now, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, H-U-D, is planning to issue new regulations to require those authorities to conduct 5-year assessments that would be more revealing of the pattern of affordable housing in their areas. The idea is to see if these communities really are trying to make affordable housing available everywhere, rather than just concentrating in poor neighborhoods, leaving the rich to live with the rich without having to see any icky poor people anywhere around. In other words, to see if these communities are actually trying to do what they're supposed to be trying to do. And the response, of course, this is outrageous. How dare they? How dare those heavy-handed, meddling government bureaucrats try to find out if this program's actually working? Because the attitude the government is getting is, they should just give us the money and be quiet. We're entitled to the money without being told what to do with it. But conditions on it, outrageous. But, and here's the point, Debbie Goldberg, she's the vice president of the National Fair Housing Alliance. She said, this is the way it works. This is the way it's supposed to work. All these jurisdictions, these counties, these states, municipalities, whatever, they don't have to follow this law. They don't have to comply with this law. They don't have to take part in this program. But if they don't get the money. If you want the money, you accept the conditions under which it's given. And this is the point, because while for the rich, this is an unconscionable assault on their God-given right to free money, the fact is, this is precisely what we tell poor people all the time. You want the help? You accept the conditions. No matter how inane, humiliating, degrading, no matter how arbitrary, pointless, irrelevant, no matter how much these conditions appear to be designed to see to it that you fail, you will comply and do it without complaint. Or you can just go sleep in the streets as your family goes hungry and your children don't have medicine when they get sick. And do not imagine that is an exaggeration. Because when it comes to the poor, our attitude is like it or lump it. Put up with whatever we put you through or else. And we'll talk more about that after the break. And we're back. Because the fact is, we expect the poor to put up with all kinds of dehumanizing conditions and requirements in order to get aid. I mean, consider the way we demonize the hungry. People who depend on SNAP, this is the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, it's what we used to call food stamps. Consider the folks who rely on SNAP in order to make food purchases. Wisconsin State Representative wants people who get SNAP benefits to have to go to privately run food pantries. In other words, he's proposing basically separate, but no doubt equal, food stores for poor people. There's a member of Congress who's called on his constituents literally to watch people buying food with EBT cards. EBT is electronic benefit transfer. It's the cards that people on food stamps, on SNAP benefits use. He wants people to watch people who are buying things with EBT cards and to question them if they think anything on there is inappropriate. Wisconsin has a list of precisely what you can and can't buy with your SNAP benefits, right down to things like what type and size of canned beans you can buy. Maine wants SNAP recipients to be unable to use any of those benefits for candy or soda because, God forbid, poor children should have something fun or a treat. And the thing is, it's not just SNAP benefits, it's not just food, it's all aid to the poor. All of it, across the board. More than 20 states, and think of cash benefits, stuff, what we used to call welfare. More than 20 states have extensive lists of what cash assistance can't be used for. Some of them are named things like massages and cruises, but the point is they have these extensive lists of what you can't use these benefits for. One state official insisting that their list is educational because it sends the message that cash assistance is supposed to be used for necessities. Because, of course, the poor are unaware of the need for food or clothing or housing or medicine or transportation or whatever, and we have to educate them. That is, we have to control them because they are inferior and can't be relied on to make their own decisions. Oh, and then there's the drug testing. No matter how many times it turns out that poor people looking for help are less likely to be using drugs than their richer fellow citizens. No matter how many times it turns out that forcing applicants to submit to a drug test winds up costing more than it saves. No matter how many times these programs prove to be miserable failures that do nothing more than brand all poor people as drug addicts, still they get pushed. And the thing is, that's why they get pushed. They get pushed and they get public support because they label the poor as druggies. Because we are prepared as a society to assume that all poor people are somehow inferior, that they are irresponsible, that they are lazy, self-indulgent moochers who spend all their time getting high. They're not like us. And because they are poor, rules of privacy protection, rules against self-incrimination, they don't apply to them. We put demands on the poor that we simply do not put on the rich, that it just never occurs to us to put on anybody else. In his recent book, Divide, journalist Matt Taibbi refers to what he calls, and this is a quote, a creepy inverse correlation between rights and need. That is, in other words, in the U.S., the protection of constitutional rights, of basic human rights, is inversely proportional to how rich you are. Put another way, the poorer you are, the less rights you have. He cites the example of CalWORKS. This is the state of California's what in the past been called welfare program. Everyone who applies for aid and is accepted under this program must agree as a condition of acceptance to have their homes be preemptively searched for evidence of fraud at a time of the agency's choosing, which of course they don't tell you about in advance. And if you're not there when they come, you can be labeled uncooperative and denied aid. So in short, not only are you a prisoner, in essence, in your own home until whenever this raid occurs, it means the Fourth Amendment does not apply to you, and neither does innocent until proven guilty, because you are poor and need help. Now, can you even conceive of someone declaring their children as tax exemptions on their tax forms, being told they have to agree to have their home preemptively searched in order to prove those kids actually live there? Remember, that exemption for those kids, that's a benefit. It's a tax benefit. It's a tax benefit that by cutting your taxable income puts extra money in your pocket, every bit as much as any cash assistance to any poor person. In fact, in both cases, the idea is the same, so that you have more money to spend. But can you imagine anyone being told that they have to surrender their Fourth Amendment rights in order to claim that tax exemption? And you know, some of those drug programs, some of those drug testing programs, not only want you to get tested in order to get benefits, they want you regularly tested in order to keep them. Can you even imagine, can you even conceive of someone declaring a mortgage deduction on their income taxes, being told that every year, in order to claim that deduction, they have to submit to a drug test in order to prove that the money we're giving them through this benefit is not being used for drugs? Fact is, of course you can't. Of course you can't. You can't imagine a non-poor person being told they have to surrender their basic rights in order to obtain a public benefit. But you can imagine it happen to a poor person. And in fact, it happens every day. It is the great unacknowledged evil in our society. Unacknowledged because even though you might somehow be aware of the fact that poor are treated differently, it doesn't register that way. It doesn't register as an evil. It just registers, quite often, it registers as a good thing. It doesn't register as an evil the way an equally blatant fact of racism or sexism would. This is classism. This is our contempt for the poor. Our contempt for the poor, this classism cuts across race, it cuts across gender, it cuts across age, it cuts across income groups. Because while classism is driven by the corruption and the power of the wealthy, it infects our entire society. It is pervasive, it is constant, it is all around us in ways major and minor. In Divide, Matt Taibbi also said, and quoting, "We have a profound hatred for the weak and the poor." When he was asked how he came to that conclusion, which I would label an insight, he said it was from visiting U.S. courtrooms and seeing the different ways poor and rich defendants get treated by the courts. He said that when a poor person, a person without means, comes before a judge in some inner city courtroom, the judge doesn't even want to hear anything from the defense attorney, and in fact seems angry about having to deal with this defendant at all. But when he attends trials involving white-collar criminals, the judge is often very interested in what the defense attorneys, and the plural is deliberate, what the defense attorneys have to say, even to the point of sometimes asking their advice on points of law. And there is a sense of admiration for the accused, who are regarded somehow as special, as important, as significant, as superior people. The way I would sum it up, what the word justice means in the United States, in the U.S. political and legal system, depends almost entirely on who is asking for it. Even the way we donate money reflects that class division, reflects the classism of our society. Repeated studies have shown that as a percentage of household income, the poorest 20% of the population gives more than the richest 20%. And more to the point, the poor give mostly to religious organizations and social service charities, while the wealthy give to colleges, museums, and the arts. In other words, to the stuff that they themselves use. In fact, of the 50 largest individual gifts to public charities in 2012, not one of them went to a social service organization or charity that principally served the poor or the dispossessed. Not one. We are an unjust society. And I don't mean just an unequal one. I mean a morally corrupt one. A society whose richest, that is, whose most powerful members are by that very wealth, by that very power, twisted into ethically bankrupt indifference to the needs and concerns of others, and that sickness infects the rest of our culture. And it will not change, not on its own. It's not something we can grow out of, mature out of as a society. Because in fact, as time goes on, we're growing ever more into it. It will not change on its own, and it will only change if there is direct action taken against it. Otherwise, it will get worse. And no, neither Hillary nor even Bernie represent direct action against that corruption of power. Because this is not just about faces. It is not about just slowing the decline. Now, I will grant you, by the way, I will grant you that slowing the decline is a perfectly fine thing to do, as long as you bear in mind that's all you're doing. You're not reversing the decline, you're just slowing it down. The thing is, this is about real power. What I'm talking about is change, as real change. Because this is about power, about changing power. And when you talk about confronting power with a demand for real change, you were talking about revolution. Frederick Douglass said it best: power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. So change is going to require struggle. It's going to require a genuine social revolution. It doesn't have to be, it shouldn't be a violent one, but it does have to be aggressive. It's going to require disruption. It's going to require people in the streets. It's going to require a lot more than Twitter feeds and Facebook posts, and way far more than vote for Democrats. It's going to require a combination of the intensity and determination of the labor movement of the 30s, the fearlessness of the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, the passion of the anti-war and counterculture movements of the 60s and 70s, and the creativity of the Occupy movement of this century. We have to be loud, boisterous, insistent, not just once, but over and over and over again. We have to fill the streets and, yes, the jails. We have to make business as usual impossible. We have to be disruptive, noisy. We have to be impolite. I'm reminded of something from years ago. May 17th, 1968, a group of 9 anti-war protesters went into the draft board in Catonsville, Maryland. They pulled out a bunch of draft files of men who were about to be drafted, took them outside and burned them with homemade napalm before waiting to be arrested. At his sentencing, one of the 9, Daniel Berrigan, read a statement in which he said the action was, and I'm quoting, "In consequence of our inability to live and content in the plague city, to say peace, peace when there is no peace, to keep the poor poor, the thirsty and hungry, thirsty and hungry. Our apologies, good friends, for the fracture of good order, the burning of paper instead of children, the angering of the orderlies in the front parlor of the charnel house." We too have to be prepared to anger the orderlies in order to force those who stand behind them. Quoting Douglass again, "It is not light that we need, but fire, not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, the earthquake." We are, I fear, approaching a time when the choice will simply be confront or capitulate. Those kind of movements I mentioned before, none of them were violent. But each in their own way, they brought the fire, they brought the thunder, they brought the whirlwind. We need that storm again. I hope that revolution comes soon. I don't know if it will. I don't know if it'll come at all. No one does. What I do know is that it's possible. And when and if it happens, the one thing you can be sure of is that, most like every other revolution, it will come as a complete surprise to those who are its targets. That's it for this week. We are done. I am out of here. You have the best week you possibly can. Peace.